EU Deforestation Regulation in comparison to those which are currently subject to the EU Timber Regulation. And that's really for two reasons. Firstly, the definitions of operator and trader are wider, more encompassing than the definitions that exist within the EU Timber Regulation. So, for example, now in the Deforestation Regulation, an operator includes companies which are exporting from the EU, not just companies which import or place on the EU market. Secondly, the scope of products included within the annex of the EU Deforestation Regulation is longer. The list of products is longer. It includes printed paper and many other wood products which were, for one reason or another, excluded from the EU Timber Regulation. If you're currently complying with the EU Timber Regulation, or even if you're not, it is worth looking at the language of the new regulation to determine whether you are within the new regulation an operator or a trader for some of the products that you import, export, or buy, sell, or manufacture within the EU. That would be a first step. And again, really independently of whether you're currently complying with the EU Timber Regulation, because even if you may not have been applicable to the EU Timber Regulation, but possibly you are for the EU Deforestation Regulation. Secondly, again, look at your products and those which you're currently trading or manufacturing or importing. Again, you may be subject to the EU Deforestation Regulation based on that expanded scope of products. Thirdly, we do have, I think once you've determined that you are subject to the regulation, there are a number of steps you should be taking in order to prepare. I understand that the regulation will be applicable to companies towards the end of 2024. That sounds like it's a long way away. In actual fact, it's really just towards the end of next year. Companies had 3 years to prepare for the EU Timber Regulation. This time round, they will have only 18 months to prepare for the EU Deforestation Regulation once it comes into force. So you don't have a lot of time. And in terms of what companies can do, beyond just some of those that I've mentioned, I think the first step is always engaging with your supply chain, understanding if they've heard about the EU Deforestation Regulation. It's never too early to begin to educate your supply chain about the coming regulation. It's important to let them understand that you will be requiring, more information probably from them going forward. You will need to understand, have a better understanding of your supply chains and traceability back to the forest. You will need to ensure that information on the geolocation of the plots of land from which harvesting took place is coming down that supply chain and you're obtaining that information, as well as the date of harvesting. Following on, in relation to companies' risk assessments, if you do currently have a risk assessment as part of your EU Timber Regulation due diligence system, just keep in mind that you will need to revise and upgrade that risk assessment to align with the new definition of legality as defined within the EU Deforestation Regulation, and all of those different requirements that the regulation places on topics which should be considered as part of the risk assessment. And also, of course, you need to align the regulation, the risk assessment, with the definitions of deforestation and forest degradation. Those definitions are very important because according to the wording of those two definitions, they will have implications on your business and your supply chains and what might be considered to be a source with risks or without risks. It's important to assess your policies, your sustainable sourcing policy, and all of those procedures and operational activities that sort of take place below that, with a view to upgrading those as well and aligning those with the EU Deforestation Regulation. It's very common within the wood and paper sectors to use certification as a method of mitigating risks or demonstrating low risk. It will be necessary at some point to reevaluate those certification schemes and standards and ensure that they also meet the requirements of the EU Deforestation Regulation. And that to some extent also may require that you engage with the certification schemes themselves, the standards scheme owners, in order to really understand how those schemes are planning to respond and revise their standards and their systems in relation to the regulation.